All right. Hello everybody. I'm here with Matteo. It's day 307 of the Gaza War. And I don't know, we're still waiting. We're still waiting for this response. We had a speech and Hamas announced that Yahya Sinwar will be replacing Ismail Haniyeh as head of the Politburo, but the thing that they're going to do in response, Iran and Hezbollah hasn't come yet, or even Yemen. So we're in this waiting period. It's sort of like a good time to talk about more theoretical issues or anything like that, because after this, we're going to be back to covering the news every day, I suppose.
Yes.
So what's on your mind, Matteo?
I don't know. I've been thinking about. Have you, by the way, just a quick going back on the news. Did you hear that Jordanian foreign minister is back in Iran talking?
No, I didn't. Everybody's going to Iran. I mean, the Russians going to Iran was interesting. That was an interesting
That's
story, and
right.
I still don't know what what really happened there. Um, they say it was a scheduled meeting, that it wasn't.
Yeah. That there was a continuation of a meeting that took place previously before this escalation, confrontation, political homicide by the Zionists. Uh, but yeah,
But Jordan went once, and they said we don't know what they said, but
yeah,
they.
we don't know. Yeah, that's right. But we saw the face of the Jordanian foreign minister.
I mean, they're gonna. Yeah, I mean, Jordan, Saudi, they're in an awkward position because they've been told they've been told several times that anyone who helps will be treated like the enemy.
That is right. And I think what is emerging from this last meeting is that Jordan appears to condemn the act of assassination and is now emphasizing the end of the brutal attack on Gaza. But I mean,
Yeah.
we really know why Jordan is there and on whose behalf Jordan is mediating. Maybe there is a space of a very tiny space, little space of autonomy for Jordan, but I think,
Yeah.
you know,
So Jordan has some kind of agreement. I was hearing about this yesterday. Jordan has some kind of ironclad treaty with America that says America shall have free, unfettered, unimpeded access to um, their own Jordanian airspace and land and whatever for their military purposes.
yeah, this is one of the pillars of the national liberation struggle of the Jordanians, making
Hmm.
sure that the Americans can use their airspace whenever they want, whenever they feel like.
To protect
Sound
Israel.
exactly. Sounds fair.
The other thing, the other news you may have heard that when they kidnapped the Israelis kidnapped the preacher of Al-Aqsa Mosque,
Yes, yes, I remember
and they
that.
released him apparently today and said he's not allowed to go to his own mosque for 6 months. So
What is the
that's
logic of all this anyway? I mean, I
that's
know
that's
that,
just inflammatory, right? This is just like
yes.
re religious inflammatory acts to inflame
You
the
know,
region.
I'm gonna throw a sort of a torch now to lit a fire on you, Justin, which is incite this religious component of the conflict. I
Yeah.
know we keep talking about the material component of this. I know we keep talking about the ideological struggle and so on and so forth. But how much, this is, how are we supposed to look at this war as well as a religious war, but in the sense of an ideologically religious war?
Well, yeah. So I guess the way I see it is ideology and imperialism and capitalism and the ruling class, all of these things, they are all made concrete by specific people and specific institutions and specific lobbies and other groups. So, when people say when people say criticize Ritter or Galloway or David Miller or John Mearsheimer for saying, the Zionist lobby has corrupted our politics. It's like your politics are corrupt already. Your politics are imperialist, and imperialist politics are racist and corrupt. Like
That's right.
um there's no way to America wouldn't be innocent in the absence of Zionism, and the UK wouldn't be an anti-racist utopia in the absence of Zionism. But um the like there is a lobby, there is a group of influential Zionists, and they do conspire to do things, and they do act in secret and in on the open, and they brag like they did about how they can take down Cory Bush or Jamal Bowman or whatever. And
Yeah.
it's not that America would like America would still be an imperial power, and America would still use its imperial power to do all these things. But like these groups influence which way
Hmm.
America goes when, and they
Hmm.
influence what happens to individual politicians. They influence what happens, right? So maybe in the absence of the Israel lobby, America might have let Israel go by now and gone into war with China, or gone to more in conflict with Russia, or done more things in Latin America. Like it's the lobbies that want everything to go to Israel that make sure that everything goes to Israel. That without the lobby, would the US be able to choose between Israel and Ukraine? I don't know. Like these are the decisions. Like both of those policies are imperialist policies,
Yeah. Yeah.
but they're influenced by factions inside the elite, including the Israeli elite, which is part of the American elite. It's a totally integrated thing. But like that influences the specific actions of the empire in a given moment. So you have to understand that imperialism plays out through organized bodies of people and elite decision making. So,
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I think, and especially in this, my thoughts on this is that, especially in this historically situated moment which we're living, that we know there is a qualitative change. Imperialism is not as strong
mhm,
as it used to be. There has been, the rise of China, of course, the military confrontation with Russia repeatedly in different scenarios. We're seeing what's happening in the Sahel. October 7th is another reminder. So I think that in this specific moment of history, these actors, which are normally considered, we have a tendency to say, okay, this is an American war over the Arabs, over Palestine. That's true. I mean, there is the material component. Now they are. I think it was this morning I read, going back to the news, that they are now re-allowing the export of bombs that they had previously
mhm.
blocked.
Yeah,
So
that's been a few days. Yeah,
okay, okay.
yeah.
So this is crystal clear to all of us. But at the same time, when it comes to actual directives, to the actual strategy being implemented also on the ground, even if we look at Ukraine right now, I strongly believe that we need to understand this historical moment, because there is a degree of increased autonomy for these reactionary allies that imperialism has.
Mhm,
And
mhm. Okay.
imperialism is not able to control them completely. So I think this is where it's important to, like, when you look at the phone call that the Russians had with the US generals, when they said, we discovered these plans from the Ukrainians. If
Mhm,
this is going to happen, we're going to escalate. The whole tit for tat, the New York Times. And I think the same thing is happening with Israel right now. I think that the government in place is being able, it's trying to tilt the balance in a way, between a bland support for human rights, whatever that the US government has, vis-a-vis total war. They know how to play their cards. They tilt the balance. I mean, they have
Well,
that space.
yeah, but again, I don't know. So if we think of the idea that Israel has more autonomy now,
Mm.
or Ukraine has more autonomy now, like, and we don't really mean Ukraine, we mean like the Bandera people in
Yes,
Ukraine,
that's
but
right.
like
Yes.
the Bandera Ukraine has more autonomy now, but it's not. I don't know if autonomy is the word I would use because
Bravo. Yeah.
only because
Yeah.
they're more dependent now than they ever have been, right? So now the US is scrambling all their navy and they're building a new air defense, like
You're
they're
right.
building the boat as they go. The Ukrainians are completely as the pro-Russian analysts like to say, the fourth iteration of the Ukrainian army is in the process of being destroyed by Russia because the first one was destroyed within months, the second one was rebuilt and then destroyed, and then the third one was, I think we're on the fourth one. I don't know, but like all the equipment is all the old Soviet equipment they were using has been destroyed. Everything they're using now came during the war, and
Yeah.
most of the recruits that they're throwing as cannon fodder came during the war. So they're more dependent now than they ever were. So for me, it's like, it's all the wrong question. Like, is it the lobby or is it imperialism? It's like, um, the lobby, as well as Netanyahu himself, as well as Gallant, as well as Gantz, as well as Harris and Biden, whatever is left of Biden and Blinken, they're all a group of people that work together for the
Yeah.
same goals. And right now, I would say Netanyahu is the one calling the shots, but like that can change if an organized group of people in America can dethrone him. They're in a bit of disarray right now. And so he's got the most coherent plan, which is saying a lot because he doesn't really have a coherent plan, but he has some kind of direction of genocide that he wants to go, and nobody
Yeah.
in America can think of anything else to do. So, if and that the reason for that I think is because um the there's only really two imperialist positions. One is total destruction of the subalterns and anywhere and everywhere, and the other one is co-optation.
Yeah.
And so co-optation is the co-optation people right now in the empire are like, let's do a deal, let's do a ceasefire, let's get this over with. But there's nobody to play with on the other side. Hamas is like, we have made it clear that we'll make a deal
Hmm.
if it involves these conditions. There has to be
Hmm.
a total ceasefire, there has to be a prisoner exchange, there has to be a siege. And so the people who want to make a deal aren't exactly empowered. They can't find collaborators to make a favorable deal to the overall interest. So they can't recruit people in the ruling class to that consensus. I think that's what's going on. Like, you can't have an Oslo kind of exit for this now.
No, you
Oslo
can't.
Oslo being, the generation of a group of collaborators in Palestine to administer this Palestine for you. There isn't anybody on the other side. And the same goes for Russia. Like, there could be a group of people
Hmm.
in America who want to have peace with Russia, on American terms. And then they would say, let's find a Yeltsin or let's find a whoever and make some kind of deal with them. But you there is no Yeltsin. You've got Putin, and then you've got Medvedev, and you've got people that don't want to deal with you. So I think that's part of why it just seems so rudderless, and it seems so just continuously moving towards genocide. But and that's also why right now in this moment the lobby seems invincible, and Netanyahu goes and gets
Yes.
everybody to clap for him and give him.
And crystal clear. Yeah.
standing
Well, I mean,
ovation.
this dynamic of dependence that you were describing, it's right, because you know, the moment you have that decline, you see how the two parts become really like, you know, it's an existential war, as it was said from the beginning. You know, you are striking a blow to a core interest of the imperialist, but it is a core interest. I mean, it goes back to a tension, which I think it has to do with historical materialist theory, the fact that, you know, we always try to define the laws of development, but then we are left with the situation where, okay, what about people? I mean, once
Hmm.
we know that history moves according to these laws, what, you know, the people can just sit back and, you know, and flow with these laws. That's not exactly what historical materialism is saying. You
Hmm.
need to concretize these laws into class, into groups of interest, and so on and so forth.
Hmm.
So there is definitely a need to understand how the lobbies, the groups, the ruling elites, the ruling class work to uphold that laws of development that, you know, that we can call imperialism, capitalism, and so on and so forth. So it's really a question of political strategy at the end of the day, and also of communication. Why
Hmm.
is that the Zionist lobby makes a lot of sense, I think, in a place like the US, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, the Zionist lobby in Italy, it's not a thing, for example.
Mm. It's big in Canada.
No.
Yeah. It's big in France, right? I mean, France has a powerful Zionist, organized Zionist lobby, doesn't it? Maybe not. I don't know.
I'm not that I'm aware. I mean, I do not identify because there isn't that corporativist, uh, I don't know, division of power in the way it is,
Mm.
it exists in the US. I mean, I'm sure there is, but it takes place differently. I, I believe. And I think the organic connection is much stronger than the US. Possibly with the UK, we can talk about, you know, the existence of a certain lobby group and so on and so forth. Definitely.
To go back to your religion thing though, because that your original question was, how do
Yeah.
we understand the role of religion or like, Jewish religion specifically or versus Islam? You wrote an essay
Mm-hmm.
about Islam too, and how the resistance understands Islam. I mean, it was an essay or a Twitter thread or something, I remember. But uh, it the thing is the the Israelis see it as a religious war.
That's right.
Um, you know, and so like religion is what people believe. That's what it is. There's nothing else to religion. It's not like like trees are there whether we believe in them or not. Like the sun and the nitrogen and high H2O, it's all there whether we believe in it or not. But religion is only what we believe, right?
That's right.
So if there are people at war believe it's a religious war, then I suppose it
It
is.
is.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I've been thinking in my mind. You know, it's been coming back in a way because you don't want to reduce this to a religious war for many reasons, but at the same time, you cannot escape that component either.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
Yeah. And
exists.
like Nizar Banat, who was a Palestinian, resistance intellectual who was killed by the Palestinian Authority a few years back. He went on TV. There's a famous TV appearance where he said, the Islamists have done more for liberation than the socialists have. So, you know, make of that what you will, but the fact is that like we have to theorize, we can theorize why that's the case. People talk about how the left was destroyed first and secular nationalism was the enemy, and now that it's been destroyed, there's been the rise of more religious
Yeah.
mobilizations. But it is what it is. And like Nasrallah said in his speech, I noticed this. He said, you know, that when one group of leaders gives up their rights of their people, God replaces them with another group of leaders. So God replaced the left. I guess God replaced the left with
I mean, I did, yeah, I did hear some comments, you know, about that speech where let's just put it in this way. It was a little bit too comfortable to cheer on the Arab army's defeat.
Yeah, man. I mean, Nasrallah, Fawad Shokr, the last few martyrs that he talked about all went to like Bosnia to help the
Yes,
destruction of
yes,
Yugoslavia, right? And
yes,
and
yes.
they're not like it's not like Hezbollah's like reevaluated that. They're not out there being like, well, in retrospect, maybe the destruction of this socialist market socialist multi-ethnic integrated multi-religious country in the middle of Europe, maybe that wasn't a great thing to contribute our staggering military expertise to,
This is
you know. But they haven't. They haven't. They don't think that way at
that's
all.
right. That's right.
So, and like
That's right.
Russia right now still has Chechen Muslims and Dagestani Muslims, and they're just as much part of Russia as anyone else, according to, I'm sure there's attempts to make those divisions too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But like Yugoslavia was more like that than Russia. Yugoslavia was more like that, and it's only in retrospect that people are like, no, it was the Serbs that were in charge of everything.
No.
It wasn't.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's for sure there's a kind of a mockery of all of those projects, which at the time were, there was it was close. It was close. And like when I look back at the history of Egypt, for example, like Sadat was one of those individuals that made a big difference in history and
Big time.
really bad, you know. And like he was very secretive about what he was doing. He had a secret line to Kissinger, and he thought he was being really clever, but he was being totally manipulated and outmaneuvered by the Americans at every turn.
Well, I guess as someone who's interested in the Chinese experiment, let's put it in this way, the
Mhm.
idea of I don't know if you've ever heard of the theory of the two integrations that the Chinese are developing, which is
Mhm.
basically combining communism and socialism with China's rich
Oh,
history and
so like
always
socialism with Chinese characteristics in a way.
basically,
Yeah.
yes. But the idea of the two integration is that there is constantly a back and forth between tradition and innovation.
Mhm.
You don't come up with something completely new. You always draw on tradition in order to, I mean, this is a purely on theoretical level, but we can see definitely being laid out in different experience, political experiences the Chinese have put together, even their introduction of Confucian culture to a certain extent. And I
Mhm.
think, when I look at the region right now, there is a sense of the Arab region and the West Asia more broadly. There is a sense of that this political wave of Islamism, if you want to call it in that manner, or that the resistance is
Mhm.
putting together, is is capable up until to this point to draw on a history of resistance. To go back to the tradition and seeing, even if its own emergence comes out through the defeat of a certain project. We know what, the one you were describing before.
Mhm.
But I think the more this process takes place, the more organically, the defeat of Zionism will come about, I think, because there is really an integration of the history of resistance. These two systems of integration, going back, but also innovating what was given to, by history.
The other major historical, I mean, I like this two integrations. I hadn't heard it put that way, but you can definitely, when you were talking, I was thinking about how Russia's doing something similar in terms of
Hmm.
their war, the way they're fighting the war. If you watch the Ukraine war, it's so high tech, right? With drones, like it's more high tech. It's more, there's more fighting per day on a bigger war front and more heavy equipment and more people dying per day
That's
than
right.
in Gaza,
That's right.
right? And so, but like if you watch what's going on, they have trenches and they have drones and they have armored vehicles of every kind and helicopter. Like everything you can imagine that happens in war is happening over there, and it's always been right. Like World War II was over there. It was some same places, same battlefields, And you know, the way that someone, there's like a lot of Russian commentators who say that, you know, the Russian general staff and their model of
Hmm.
warfare has been in place for hundreds of years continuously. Like the kind of the approach that they take to warfare, the strategies that they, the way they understand warfare is different from the Americans, right? The Americans have like a naval, you know, we go and bomb. It's like naval superiority, air superiority. You don't, war isn't about taking casualties. War is about island
Superior.
hopping and,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And Russia's not. Russia has this, you know, Russia understands it in terms of ground warfare, and it's not a blitzkrieg. It's never been like about punching a hole in the enemy's defenses and driving for the capital quickly. It's like it's always constriction,
Mm-hmm.
attrition.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's costs. It's costly. It's to be avoided when you know at almost at all costs. So it's a whole system that goes back a long time, which now has modern, you know, the latest technology attached to it. And so it's two integrations. And then we can think of the Arab world the same way. So like I was just thinking of Yemen, right? And it's like Islamism until into my mind, until recent years, Islamism was like a Saudi thing. I always thought of
Yeah.
it as like ISIS and Saudis and
Wahhabism, yeah.
Wahhabism, right? And now like there's just so many different ways to be
Hmm.
believing, right? So we have like different kind of Shia in Yemen and Sunnis in Gaza and what the West Bank, like Palestinian Sunnis and um Palestinian socialists
It's the
that are part of this coalition
so
and Lebanese Shia and Iranian Shia. I think that's the same Shia, but like there's really different, you know, really different things that they read and different stories that they go to and a
mm-hmm.
different aesthetic and a different
Mm-hmm.
culture and different references that they make. And it's but it's all Islam. Like as much believers as any Saudi Islamist, right?
Absolutely. And imagine when you think, I mean, I'm gonna make a comparison which came to my mind when you were talking about, like the experience that China has had with ethnic autonomy.
Mhm.
I know all our thing,
At what
listeners,
cost? Yeah.
Billy, exactly. Uh, the ethnic autonomy, and then you having this experience enable to reformulate Marxist idea around ethnicity because it forced
Hmm.
the country to do that. And
Hmm.
I think if even if it's not directly socialist or Marxist or whatever, when we look at the Islamism right now, what we're seeing is exactly the same thing because the practice is showing the necessity to come together to bring this
Hmm.
diversity of references, images, stories, and so on and so forth, and to have them coexist under a mutual project. And the project is much more ideal, bigger than that, and is a project of liberation.
Yeah.
And this is we are literally seeing the building of a historical weight of ideas that is going to be so central to the liberation of this region. And it's a beautiful historical moment to witness at the same time. I know it's bloody, I know it's destructive, but this is what it's happening. That they can coexist, they can work together for an ideal that is so important. And it goes beyond one country, it goes to all the region.
Yeah, and I mean, you had to have all these caveats because of xenophobia and Western listeners, Western, you know, educated people are so confused right now because they're simultaneously trying to hold xenophobia and Russophobia and
Mm,
Islamophobia all at once. And so they care about Muslims in China, apparently, but they want Muslims to go through genocide in Gaza, and they want Muslims in um, Lebanon to be destroyed. You know, so it's just it's all there. Westerners are completely like, but if it's only if you can let go of all of these things, all of these various phobias, these imperialist phobias, that you
Yes.
can start to even understand what's going on. You can't begin to understand what's going on
Bravo.
because
Yes.
otherwise,
Phobia.
like this is what we have to say this every time. We have to, if you're talking about Arabs, you have to be like, well, I'm not for terrorism. And if you're talking about China, you say, well, I'm not, I don't believe in totalitarian techno dictatorship and the suppression of people in Xinjiang. But, right? So like by the time you get to the but, you've already lost the plot, and you're not like nobody ever does that for the West, where like you have a school shooting every day, you have
Yeah.
lobbies that buy the political
Yeah.
process. Like nobody has caveats before they talk about any of that, right?
Unless you're okay with being called a tank.
Ah, perfect transition. So a lot of people, Matteo, whenever we do these tanky therapy sessions, there's always poor people in the comments that are like, why do you call yourselves tankies? Because it was something that it was very popular 10 years ago to call us tankies. And then, we all got so annoyed that we embraced it. And now nobody hardly uses it anymore. It's just barely a corner of Twitter that uses it anymore. But we should talk about why we call ourselves tankies and why we embrace this label. So I
Where
think
do we start? Yeah.
in realistically, it's about Syria. Realistically,
Realistically, it's about Syria.
realistically, we
Yes.
can go back to prior
Yes.
historical references, but
Yeah.
the reason we specifically call ourselves tankies is because
Yes.
there was a split in the Palestine movement, which we were all a part of
Yes.
before. So we were
Yes.
all a part of the Palestine movement before the 2011. And then 2011 through 2013 and 2015, there was the Arab Spring, and in the
Yes.
Arab Spring, the Americans, as part of the Arab Spring, they destroyed Libya and then they went and tried to destroy Syria. And I don't know how much numerically, but a good chunk of the Palestine movement, including many Palestinians,
Mm-hmm.
supported the destruction of Syria,
Including Hamas.
including Hamas, who also supported, including Ismail, and may he rest in peace. The great late Ismail Haniyeh also
Yes.
supported the destruction of Syria for a while. He came around. He came around, right? Didn't he come
That's
around?
right. It did. It did. Yeah, it did. Definitely did.
Hamas collectively came around for the most of them, but they supported the destruction of Syria, and we didn't. We were a bunch of holdouts from the destruction of Syria.
Yeah.
And so the holdouts in terms of the destruction of Syria were accused of being tankies. And so that's when the reference to tankies comes from. So tankies originally was the British, I believe, Trotskyist left called British communists who supported the Soviet Union
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in the 50s, 60s. They called them tankies. So I guess the Palestine people who wanted to destroy Syria, and they saw in us,
Because I mean, because the Soviet Union sent tanks, obviously. I mean, I think that's the
yes, they sent
connection.
tanks
Yeah.
to crush the Prague Spring, the
Yeah.
uprising.
Yeah.
Um, why don't you talk for a minute, Matteo? Because I've got something to deal with here.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, the idea specifically of the word tankies is connected to the Soviet Union historically. If we do an etymology of this word, it goes back to the sending of tanks that the Soviet Union uh, did in order to push back, obviously, what was happening in Prague at that time. Now, the issue for us here obviously has nothing to do with tankies and the experience of the Soviet Union, although in a way it is connected to that too, because the moment the label tankies come about, where it needs to be obviously historically situated. And when we historically situate this label of tankies, we see that tankies become those who somehow are still aligning or, I wouldn't say identify, but anyway, politically leaning towards socialism as a project that the Soviet Union was bringing forward. That's communism. But tankies draws a line saying, as a label saying, okay, you are pro-Soviet Union, we are instead, European communist. And this is a very important moment, because what we're seeing is basically, and this is where Domenico Lo Surdo, at least as an Italian, comes really handy to explain this process. We see the birth of Western Marxism. Why? Because you see an increasing pushback towards anything that has to do with socialism, not just with the Soviet Union, but also with the sphere of countries that support or ally with the Soviet Union at the time. On the other hand, you have this idea of Euro-communism, which goes back to Berlinguer. Enrico Berlinguer in Italy was one of the first to use this word, this idea of we need the European communism. And the idea he had was that basically looking at the failed experience in Chile with, help me, I remember Allende, yes, with the failed experience, with the coup of
they destroyed
the
it.
US backed coup. Berlinguer basically says, oh, look, we can't have a socialist revolution because they're going to come and we, basically undertake a coup d'etat in our country. We need to go through the path of elections and electoral politics.
But Allende went through the path of electoral politics.
Basically, the idea was that we cannot be too extreme in what we believe we can do.
So don't do anything that offends. Do communism, but not in a way that offends America.
Basically.
Except that America is offended by communism.
So it's an inherent contradiction that Western Marxism is unable to resolve at that point in history, which also has to do with the, with the progressive rise of the unipolar order. Obviously, it's not coming out of the blue. Now we can look back and see this. But the term tankie comes back now, and all of a sudden, I think it's useful and it's important along the lines of the two integrations, Justin, to draw from the tradition of tankies, but not necessarily of the label, of this non-Western Marxism in order to explain the current historical moment.
Well, the other politics that comes up in North America anyway, maybe in Europe, is anarchism. So, I've always, had a soft spot for anarchism and
yeah.
So there's a critique of the state, right? There's a critique of the state. And so like anarchists understand the state and capital to be like two enemies. And what that in an imperialist context, unfortunately, the reason I had to let go of a lot of the anarchism that I had a soft spot for is in an imperialist context, when you want to destroy third world states, you're basically, just creating an imperialist colony every time. So, the question that I couldn't get a straight answer for from any of my anti-tanky former comrades was like, what do you think is going to happen in Syria after the state is destroyed and Assad is overthrown? And it's very clear to me, it was very clear to me that it was going to be Al-Qaeda, ISIS, America, and Israel. And it's like how, for me, it was always like, how can you, who's a pro-Palestine person, want the outcome that Israel has been working for since Syria became independent? How can you want that? How can you think that that is desirable from the point of view of Palestinian liberation? And it was always like this abstract thing of like Assad is doing bad things, and I've seen that even recently.
Very recently, I've seen it too. Yeah,
we're gonna keep this at the subtweet level, but Assad did bad things and Israel does bad things, and so it's like, yeah, Assad breathes air and Israel breathes air. Like everybody does bad things. Like what in the context of war, like they were trying to overthrow Syria, and the bad things they describe are things that every state does when you're trying to overthrow it. Like, and so maybe the anarchist response is, well, then that's why we don't like states. But it's like, you're gonna get a state when Assad is overthrown, it's going to be called the Islamic State, and it's going to be a U.S. Zionist outpost.
Yeah.
So,
To
so
I
that's
want to
why.
bring up one thing about the anarchists,
Yeah.
and that I'm sure you know about this, which is Leila Khaled experience reflecting on the anarchists.
Hmm.
During there is a passage in when she reflects, and I remember, and she's talking about the European anarchists and some Americans that they really wanted to fight for Palestine. And I think there is a passage which she says that they were departing, and she was struck by a French anarchist student
Hmm.
who said to her like, oh, let chaos reign, like let chaos
Mm.
explode.
Yeah.
And a German one, also said the same thing. And she was like, the Palestinian people are an example of a society living without authority,
Hmm.
leadership, in total chaos,
Hmm.
which is left at the mercy of the Zionist oppressor.
Exactly.
So what do you want to do? You really, let the chaos reign? Is this what you want? And then she reflects how, these long beards and the joints were not really helpful to us during the struggle.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why, I call it incapacity in a way, or also a little bit of naivete in understanding the state, because the state is a tool. The state
Yeah.
can mediate the interest of the working classes or the interest of the ruling classes, but it's a tool.
That's a tanky belief though. So by saying that you're already a tanky, right? Because
That's
like
right. Yes.
Lasurdo, there's an interview with Lasurdo where he says where they ask him about the withering away of the state, and he's like, no, I don't think
Yeah.
there's gonna be a withering of the state.
That's
Sorry, like
what.
you're always gonna need that. How else are you gonna organize all the stuff that needs to be organized? And there's like an exclamation mark in the interview. He's like, no, I don't think the state's gonna wither away. And it was like for me, it was kind of refreshing, because my whole life to that until I read Lasurdo was like, how can I reconcile anarchism and anti-imperialism? And I was like Trotskyist friends and anarchist friends who get
Yeah.
along generally, and like anti-imperialism that I am like seeing from third world Marxism, like Che Guevara and Castro, they're all tankies, right? Like those are all tankies. Like Mao Zedong would be a tankie. Like
Oh
all of
yeah.
China's existence is a tanky existence. So
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
um and Stalin beat Hitler. Like Stalin, the Stalinist project defeated Hitler, right? Like
Hmm.
that's the ultimate tanky. It was tanks. It was actually tanks. It was a gigantic tank battle in the fields of Ukraine, Kursk. Oh my God. So, how do I reconcile these things? And ultimately I couldn't. And I kind of realized you can't reconcile them and you have to pick. And so like for me, anti-imperialism is, I have to opt for that
Which brings
first.
us to something else where I think it's doing the rounds a lot during this time, especially and again, especially among the Western leftists and in the Western Marxists. Why? Because they occupied for a long time the unipolar space, so they think they are at the center of the balance of the scale. So
Oh yeah.
always they have that kind of our position is more balanced than yours. So you
Yes.
are tankies, you are like there is always like we are at the center, and this is to say what the question of camps, of campism.
Campism. It's another word for tankyism. Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's this idea that, which you were really aptly describing now when you were saying, there is a war and there are people fighting and there is a lot of violence involved into this.
Yeah.
And you expect me to do what? So the campist would say we need to look at the nuances of Israeli society, the nuance. Hamas is bad, and like both are
Yeah.
bad,
Both are bad. Yeah.
and we need to build, along, I don't know what kind of elements they have identified in Israeli society. I would be really happy to, to have a
Yes.
discussion
Yes.
about
They
this.
want to build on the ceasefire people or the Yair Lapid or the but back when there were some refuseniks, there were refuseniks.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That was a big hope. That was a great hope of these nuanced people. So Hamas is reactionary and Netanyahu's reactionary, but we don't endorse either one. We're neither nor. It's
Yeah,
kind
the
of a
neither
neither
nor.
nor.
Yes, exactly. The neither nor that constantly comes back, that
But they
everything is
call
bad.
us, yeah, and I mean they call us campists. See, I'm so dismissive now of people who use the term campist or tankie that I mix them up. I call myself a campy or a
It can't
tankist,
be.
a tankie, a campist. I don't know, but those are all just labels. But like, yeah, the idea, the notion of you call someone a campus because you believe they're in a camp and you're not,
Yeah.
right? So it's like, oh, okay, you're in the resistance axis camp, and I'm not. I'm a free and independent thinker. And it's like you're a free and independent thinker who just happens to reproduce all of the imperialist talking points that any of us have ever heard in the most boring and stereotyped way. And that's what being a free and independent thinker constitutes, right? So
Yeah, yeah. And Syria was a turning point for all of us. It was really critical.
yeah, I mean, and I know I have friends who were like, I have friends who kind of stayed friends with me, but tried to not in public, you know? So they were sort of like, listen, man, like, I think you're right, but all my friends are anti-Assad. So, like, out of social pressure, they've
Yeah,
there's enough social pressure to not lose friends that
yeah.
kind of being in the political wilderness. I guess this happens on the left all the time. The being in the political wilderness with no friends is um worse than being right. And for me, it was like, I think then who's the campus then, right? Are you sure I'm the campus? Like I'm the one who's lost all my friends over this the Palestine movement. So I don't know
That's
if
right.
I'm so.
And it happens with this mechanism and strategies that they employ, where they personify politics. So you're not
Mhm,
anymore somebody who's supporting the
mhm,
struggle for national sovereignty of Syria, whether it's with Assad. It's Assad himself in an interview says that. He said, it's not about me and it's
mhm.
not about my family. It's they want Syria. They want to destroy Syria.
Absolutely.
Now, I happen to be at the government. I could be anybody else. And I agree with that. But
Yeah.
it's not a support for the person of Assad. This is really, but they personify political, and this is really where they show themselves a non-Marxist.
Well,
It's
when I was studying Haiti, the coup in Haiti in 2004, I wrote a book about that. And that
it
was like
did.
people called me a Lavalassian and like an Aristide, an Aristide puppet. And it's like Aristide is like the least, he's like a pacifist priest. Like, they came to his palace and they were like, we're doing a coup. And he was like, okay, 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 fine, and they let him fly him to Central African Republic. Like he's not a fighting man in any way, right? He was just like very beloved by the people because he was like trying to raise minimum wage and get people one meal a day and
That,
and it's like, yeah, I'm an Arist, that's what I am. I'm an Aristidean, like there's not even a
that's
name, but every time they decide somebody has to go,
oh yeah.
they paint the anti-imperialists as if we're blind followers of whoever that is, like an Assad is. Assad doesn't even have, I don't know, like there's no like Assad little red book as far as I know. There's no
No,
like there's not even
no.
like you could say you're with your academic background, it's you could say you're a Gaddafist.
Oh yeah, I
Gaddafi has a
am.
green book and you
Yeah,
could
yeah.
follow that book and follow that ideology. But Assad doesn't even have that. So like Assad is just like this somebody who doesn't want Syria to fall apart and become ISIS. Like if Assad stands for anything, it's basically like secular nationalism, you know?
It doesn't make sense, but the thing is that there is a whole this is the historical process we have witnessed. Really we have to always connect the whole to the part. Western Marxism, on the one hand, which meant the destruction of Marxism, the completed dilution. So then we have all this rising intellectual class that tends to explain things through the lens of violence or morality.
Mhm.
And this is why we are here where we are, where we have to basically go through a layer of do you condemn Hamas or whether or not you
Yeah.
do it in order to start speaking rationally. about the fact that we are witnessing a national liberation, that violence has different role according to who exercise it. There is, some violent things are legitimized and justified while others are not. We want to explain why, but if we do so, we are all pro whatever.
Campist. Yeah. And
It's
then you have open debates in Israeli society about whether, how much rape should be allowed. So like that's not, that's okay. We have to condemn Hamas, but they don't have to open all of their pro-Israel comments with, of course, I condemn the rape of innocent people or whatever. So, anything
yeah.
else?
No, I insist on the two integration system for us tankies to draw back from history and bring innovation to the present.
Yeah, I mean that's the problem for the West. The problem for Western Marxists who don't want to be Western Marxists in the sense that you've been talking about is like the West is so the tradition of the West is colonialism, and so much of what the West has is stolen intellectual property to an extent that most people don't even realize.
Yeah.
So that like if you're trying to do two integrations, and like if you're in North America, it's stolen indigenous land as well. And these are also artificial colonies, they have deeper roots than Israel because they were at it longer, but they shouldn't exist in their form either. Indigenous land back is like the only meaningful political project for North America from my perspective, and liberation of the African some people call the neo-African colony, but like I don't like to do the Western tradition, it's hard to know what that is once it's cleansed of all of
Yeah,
these
once
genocidal trappings.
I don't know. That's a good question because, with 5 cycles or whatever, 4 cycles of accumulation, and when you've been at the top constantly exploiting and devouring,
Yeah.
there was an article from an old, that related to my research produced by, as a Gaddafi, produced by the Libya Intellectual Knowledge,
Yeah.
where the Dracula's imperialism, you're
Yeah.
sucking blood, it's true, like, I don't know. The thing is that we need to be able also, maybe, maybe the rise of a different world is gonna put us in a condition where we can find something from our own tradition that is
Yeah.
still relevant. I think we do have something.
I think so too. I think if there's any group of people that does stuff over hundreds of years, there's going to be things that are of interest for humanity. It's just that, yeah, it's just such a prolonged and difficult project. And you're right, it has to take place in a different world for
Yeah.
it to actually honestly take place. So
Yeah.
I guess we'll see.
I guess.
Thanks, Matteo.
Thanks, Justin.
I'm glad I woke up early to record this. Okay.
You
Take care, everybody.